Welcome to the Loopy Pro video manual. This is a series of videos designed to get you up and running with Loopy Pro as fast as possible. In this video, we're going to be talking about MIDI. Musical Instrument Digital Interface, or MIDI as it's most preferably known, is a series of messages from one device to another. But when Loopy Pro is involved, we can send a series of messages from something physical like a pedal or a keyboard into Loopy Pro to control the session, the buttons, anything that you've built, or to control something outside of Loopy, for example, an AUV3 plugin or an effect. Today we're going to be looking at two things with three different elements. The first one is MIDI control and the second one is MIDI learn. Now a caveat with this, I'm not going to be going too deep into how MIDI works. There are plenty of videos on the internet for that, but we're going to be specifically talking about MIDI with Loopy Pro. Now with Loopy Pro, you can send MIDI in, but you can also send MIDI out from Loopy Pro to tell something to do something else. But the first one I'm going to go through is MIDI control. If we click the menu button, you can see we've got MIDI control. This is to control things by MIDI. For example, a pedal, a keyboard, an expression pedal, or anything that transmits MIDI into Loopy Pro. Now, one of the advantages of having Loopy Pro on your phone or tablet is that it has Bluetooth built in, and you can have Bluetooth MIDI, which is essentially MIDI are really small pieces of data, and they can be transmitted over Bluetooth really fast. So much so that you can almost not feel the difference when you press a key on a keyboard and hear the sound. So you can go wireless if you have the right devices, things like a Bluetooth MIDI transmitter, or a pedal or keyboard that actually has Bluetooth built in. As you can see here, we've got virtual MIDI in, and when you click on this, you've got a couple of options. Now by default, you have a device type, which is generic device. You also have the option for the MIDI fighter twister. If you do own one of them, you can use that straight away. You have feedback enabled, and you can also use MIDI timestamps. Now I've got my audio interface plugged in. You can see it underneath virtual MIDI in there, which is Audio Fuse Studio. The Audio Fuse Studio actually does have a MIDI port, so each MIDI device can be configured to receive messages or send messages in and out of Loopy Pro. On top of that, you've got the project settings, so you can actually have different MIDI settings per project for different things. Now to tie up a MIDI command from Loopy Pro to something else, it's called a binding. So when we go into current project, you can see we don't have any, and it says add new binding, and it asks what action do you want it to be binded to. So for now, let's just use something simple as play stop. So the target is what inside Loopy Pro are we binding this to? So we can actually say target can be specific clips or specific colors of clips or all the clips. So I'm going to select all the clips for this because I want them all to hit play stop when I press a certain button. Loopy Pro does not yet know what you want it to do because it doesn't assume whether it's a keyboard, a fader, a pedal, a button. So you have a couple of options here, things like the action is play stop, and the target is all clips. You have quantization, depending on what you're using. You have fade in and fade out. It says respect the play groups, and also remember playback state. So on play, start only the previous playing loops, and we can say loop or play once. And I can save that. Now I've saved it, it's asking, well, what's the trigger? What's the actual thing that we're going to do? So with the binding, we've done the action, what we want it to do. Now we've got the trigger. The trigger is whatever's going to be pressed to make this happen. So it's unassigned at the moment. It says it's listening for events. You could actually tap a key or press a button, and as long as it's already connected, it'll figure it out. For this first example, I'm using this. This is the Boss FS1WL. It's a Bluetooth-based MIDI controller. Now I've actually programmed this up with different CC numbers. So this is CC 80, 81, and 82. I'm going to tell Loopy Pro to look for this. If I click the Bluetooth symbol, I have a list of things, and you can see it's already connected. It's already found it because I've connected it to this iPad before, and it remembers it just like it remembers things like Bluetooth headphones. Once you pair them once and then turn it back on, it automatically connects. So now what I need to do is assign this. As you can see now I've turned the FS1WL on, a new option is available, which is that pedal. So let's click it. Now it's asking me, what are we actually going to use to trigger this all start stop? So remember, for this example, this pedal is CC number 80, control change 80 on MIDI. We're on channel 1, and we're going to change the CC number, as you can see here, and scroll it up to CC 80. With MIDI, you have 16 channels. So I could have this on channel 1, a keyboard on channel 2, and they won't interrupt each other's messages because they're independent and they're on their own channel. So let's recap. We have the trigger, which is the FS1WL Bluetooth. We're on channel number 1. It's a CC, not a note, or a PC, which is a program change. And it says CC80, and it's actually underneath giving me a couple of options. So now we have on, off, on-stroke off, hold, or double tap. Now the great thing with MIDI and with Loopy Pro is we've just done one action, but as you can see here, we can actually do more than one action. So with that one button press, we can actually tell it to do multiple things. Maybe you wanted to play and stop all clips, but at the same time, turn off all the effects that you have. So you might want to talk to the audience in between songs. So we can add another action. And as you can see here, we can add different things. We can do things with color groups. We can even do things to send MIDI messages out to somewhere else. Maybe you want to change the effect on something that receives MIDI. You can actually do that here, and we can even do it with audio sources as well. It gets pretty powerful pretty quick, but what I would suggest is maybe take a step back and decide how you want your MIDI signals to be. We have bus actions, we have widget actions, we have page actions, even actions on the session itself, and even controller actions. For now, we're just going to stay with that button turns all the clips on and off. Then at the top right hand corner, you can see the option for saving. So let's save it. So in this session, CC80 is now play and stop all clips, and it's transferring that information, and this is programmed up to CC80. So when I press this, it will stop and start all clips. Let's go back a page, and you can see in control settings, we now have the FS1WL. I can close this. I'm just going to put a little beat down, and then you're going to see me use the pedal. So I've got 3 loops down here, and I'm not going to touch the iPad at all. We're going to use this. And it's pretty instant because it's really fast Bluetooth. So we press this button, playing all clips, press it again. And we've got this set to stop at the beginning of the loop. So let's start it again. Now I can double tap this, and it's doing exactly the same process as stopping it instantly. Now before I change anything else on the pedal or Loopy Pro, I need to talk to you about CC numbers. This device specifically, I can tell this what to be in a CC number. So I can tell this to be CC1, CC55, CC3, whatever I need it to be. Some MIDI pedals don't have that functionality, and they are dictated. So they actually tell you what CC number they are, and you can't change it. Down to the different pedal, you'll have to go through the pedal's manual to figure that out. What I'd highly recommend is if you're setting this up, maybe you've got more than one MIDI device, maybe you've got more than one AUV3 plugin, for them to have their own MIDI channel. This is the easiest way to stop interrupting MIDI commands. You press something and something else happens, and you're not sure why. So remember, for this example, this is CC80, this is CC81, and this is CC82. I've done the first one, which is play and stop all clips. This one is going to be record the current clip, and this one is going to move over to the next clip. This way I can move between clips without touching Loopy Pro, and then I can hit record on that specific clip. So we're going to go back into MIDI control. So we're going to pick the current project settings. As you can see there's our first one, which is CC80 on. Let's add a new binding. So for this one, I want it to be record, but I want it to be record the current clip. The way Loopy Pro does this is it selects a specific clip, and you can move it around with controllers, or if you're unable to touch or access the touchscreen, so we'll hit record. So the action is to record, and if the clip has audio, we're going to overdub, and you can see there's a couple of options here we can go into if you want to, but we're going to use the default settings for the session. But you can specifically change all the different things like retrospective recording, auto counting, if you really want to on that recording, which is really clever and really customizable. Now the target we want to do is we want to record the clip that I've selected. So we're going to use selected clip. This will become clear with the next button, because the next button is going to be move to the next clip. So this one, we're going to click save, and the trigger is going to be CC81 from the FS1WL. We're still on channel 1 because that's not going to interrupt because it's a different CC number. So let's stay on channel 1, it's a CC, and we're going to bring it up to 81. We'll leave the button as on, go back one, and click save. So as you can see, it says record or stop the selected clip. The next one is CC82, and what I want to do is I want to select a clip. I want to roll around and then select a clip at will. So if I keep pressing that button, it'll select the next one, the next one, the next one. And this will also bring up a slight change in Loopy Pro, which I'll show you once we've made it. So we'll go add new binding, and we're going to go to select. And the option here, we've got select different things, but we're actually going to go to select next clip, and it's already been selected. So we'll click save there. And then the trigger, what we're going to do is we're going to use the FS1WL, and this again is on channel 1, but this is going to be 82 for the CC number. So let's drag that up, and we'll leave it on, and click save. So now we have CC80, which is this one, which is play and stop all the clips. This one is record a selected clip, and this one is actually change the clip. So let me just show you this when we get out of here. So now on Loopy Pro, you'll see a white dot in the center of one of the loops. It's on the orange loop right now. and then the orange loop is just ever so slightly bigger. If I go over to the yellow one, then we can go over to the green one, and all I'm doing is pressing this button, and then that way it's selected, and then I can hit record. So I can very quickly go through all 10 loops there, and then we can press start. Record something on here. How cool is that? I didn't even touch Loopy Pro. We had stop and start all the tracks, record the selected track, and then we've got select the next track. Now, of course, if you want to do things like turn certain loops off and on, then you may need more than 3 buttons. And things like this pedal can be expanded to have more buttons on via MIDI, or you can get ones that have more buttons. The alternative is if you have a MIDI keyboard that has things like push buttons or it has faders, you could program them up to do lots of different things, maybe mute or turn on or off the different tracks, control the volume, or control different aspects. This first part is actually quite a simple process. Let's just say, for example, I don't know what the CC numbers of these are. That's no problem because we can go to the menu and you can see at the bottom there, Bluetooth devices. I know this Bluetooth device is connected, but I don't know what the CC numbers are. That's okay because the one above that is MIDI Learn. When you select MIDI Learn, you can see lots of things become selectable with a white hue over the top of lots of different controls. Now remember, the first one we wanted to do was start and stop the session. Well, that's actually the play button here. So if I click this now, this is asking me what you want to do MIDI-wise with this button. The other thing you can see at the top is you can see project with a down arrow, and you've got Bluetooth. So we know the Bluetooth is connected because we've already checked that. You can either say project or you can actually have a different profile. So you can set up a profile of things to do once and then load it back in so you don't have to reprogram it every time. But we're going to use the current project for this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually click the play button, toggle the clock pause. We have an action, which is start stop. And now you can see at the bottom there it says listening for MIDI. So let me press this button. How cool and easy is that? It's figured out it's CC80 on with Bluetooth. Done. You can see the action there is start stop. So we can say we'll toggle it, or we can say just start or just stop. And you can see toggle clock pause. So we can actually do a new one and we can do something else. So we can actually have different bindings for different things. Let's just click close in the top right hand corner. Let's create something. Boom 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 boom. And we can stop it there. Boom 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 boom. Now that's slightly different to how we did it in the first one, because the first one was actually stop the clip, whereas this one was actually pause the session. And when we pause the session, this jumps back to the beginning. So let's change this. Let's go back in to MIDI Learn. This one, we can actually turn around and say that we want to erase it. And you can see the tiny little X next door to CC80 on. Let's get rid of that. And then we'll go back. So for this one, we're actually going to tap the loop. And we can say target is clip 1, action is play stop. But why don't we actually change this to all clips? It's still listening for the MIDI, so let's press this button. There we go, CC80, done. And we can actually get out of there. So let's click close. And you can see as I press it, while the session is paused, it's muting and stopping all the clips. Let's start the session. Boom, 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 boom. So there we go, exactly the same, but the way we've done it is we've actually got Loopy Pro to listen out for the MIDI message, and I didn't have to know what the MIDI message was on this. So let's do what we did with the second one, which is record. Now this was record selected clip, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to press a clip. It doesn't matter which one it is. And you can see at the top there it says play stop, and the actions are back a page. So let's go back one, and we're going to go record. So it says record on clip 3, but we're going to say record selected clip. And you can see it's toggle. Again, if the clip has no audio, do overdub. And again, right at the very bottom, it's listening for the MIDI command, which is going to be this one. CC81, it's on, and then we can get out of there. And the last one, remember, is select clip. So this is actually going to select the next clip. So it doesn't matter which one I press. I'm going to press one of the loops. Again, the middle one. Let's go back to the actions. We'll go to select, select next clip. There we go. It's listening for the MIDI, so we want that one. And we can just tap anywhere on the screen outside of the menu to get out of the menu. And we just click close. So now we can press. We can go across this one. And we can do that straight away. It's really cool. you can see the way we've been able to do exactly the same with MIDI learn as we have programming it up with MIDI control. Sometimes MIDI learn is easier because all you've got to do is turn it on and then you say, I want that one. And that way you don't have to worry too much about what the CC number is. Okay, so the next section for this is actually using a keyboard. So you can see right here, we've got the Arturia Keylab 49 Mark II. It's a MIDI controller keyboard which has multiple things. It has keys on there for playing the piano or synthesizers. It also has controllers, knobs, and pads. Now again, this also depends on what MIDI keyboard you've got, what MIDI channel it's running on, and its capabilities. Now I've actually plugged it in by USB into my audio interface. And quite simply, what I want to do is control an AUV3 plugin, which is a piano. So first of all, I need to go and get that piano. So I'm going to go into the mixer, and then on the right-hand side, you can see there's a plus button. Now you have the option to add MIDI. So if I do that right now, it asks me, what are we controlling with this MIDI? And you can see straight away at the very top, we've got virtual MIDI in, we've got the audio fuse, and we've got the Keylab. And the Keylab has two options here. It has MIDI and DAW. So instead of controlling things like notes, we can control things like play, stop, record, things like that. But we're actually going to go Keylab Mark II 49 MIDI. And you can see a MIDI channel has gone up. So now if I actually press on the keyboard, you can see that the MIDI is going up and down. And that's great. It says Keylab at the bottom there. And I know that that is the MIDI for the Keylab. And that's great. So Loopy Pro is receiving MIDI messages from the keyboard so I can play the keyboard. And then what we need to do is add in our piano. For this, I'm going to use an AUV3 plugin. So I'm going to pick audio unit input. It's asking me which one do I want to use. And for this, I'm going to be using the Ravencroft 275. So right now in the mixer, you can see it's booted up the Ravencroft 275 and we have the MIDI channel. But if I press on the keys on the MIDI keyboard, the MIDI is coming in, but it's not playing the piano. And that's because we need to give it a destination. So if you go to MIDI and click on the plus of the MIDI, the only thing you can do with that MIDI is a destination. So if we give it a click, you can see it can go MIDI out to somewhere else. And in this instance, we've now got the Ravenscroft on the mixer, so it becomes available. So we tell it to go to the Ravenscroft. And now we've got MIDI control. Now I can select things in the Ravenscroft and change things how I want to with any AUV3 plugin, but I'm going to boot up another one. So we're going to go into another audio unit, and this time I'm actually going to pick something different. We're going to pick Digital D1, which is a synthesizer made by AudioKit Pro. So we can see it's there, but again, it's not being controlled by anything. What's really clever about Loopy Pro is we can tell it what to play and where to play. On the MIDI channel, you can see the Ravenscroft is selected. And if I tap on that destination, I can tell it what to play where. So you can see here, we've got all channels on the MIDI, or we can also see the range and the transpose as well. So we can maybe say that we've got the top part here up until C4. That part is the Ravenscroft. So if I play a low note, we're not going to hear anything. But when we get to C4, which is here on the keyboard, we've got that split. Then what we can do on the Digital D1 is we can add the Digital D1 to the same MIDI channel, but I'm going to click on it here and I'm going to say everything below C4. So we're going to start with B3. So we've just split the piano. Now you may not want to do it this way and you may not want to split it. So let's put this back. Now I want to be able to loop the piano and Digital D1 separately. So there's two options we have here. One is I could change the MIDI channel for each one, or quite simply, I could just mute one of the AUV3 plugins. So when we get back into our main loop, I can just tap the Ravenscroft and that'll turn it off. If I tap it again, it's playing at the same time as Digital D1. And if I tap Digital D1, we just have the piano. This is the simplest way to have multiple playable AUV3 plugins just by simply turning them on and off because they're visually there at the bottom of the page. If you go to the mixer, you can clearly see there is a mute button and a solo button. So you could obviously keep the mixer up and mute what you need. Let's add in a third one. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in another audio unit, and I'm going to add in SDSX, which is a drum pad. We're going to choose the same MIDI destination. And now we have the piano, which is the Ravenscroft, the Digital D1, and we have SDS. So let's turn the piano and Digital D1 off. And in this mode, if you need to see what's happening inside the plugin, we can tap the little arrows next door to that plugin. So you can see the little diagonal arrows, give that a click, and there it is. Now, as I tap in the middle and tap the name, it turns it off. And you can see it says idle. If I tap it on again, you can see it says on. Each plugin has its own settings, and we can go into its own keyboard, and we don't have a physical keyboard. We can go into the presets if there are any, and we can go into the settings. If that AUV3 plugin is playing notes when it's not meant to, that's why there is a panic button, and you can press panic, and what it'll do is it'll turn all the notes from that AUV3 plugin off. Monitoring we need on because we need to be able to hear it. And of course, we've got the MIDI sources. You can see it says it's the Keylab Mark II 49 in MIDI. And we've got the destinations, aka, are you allowed to record this into a loop? If so, which color loop? Now, some AUV3 plugins you might not want to hear as an output. You may only want to record it into the loops. So what we can say is monitoring through is only certain colors as opposed to the speaker. If we go to the speaker here, it looks a little bit confusing, but we could say I don't want any monitoring. I only want it to go through onto the orange color. So right now, even though it's on, I can hear it because we've actually got monitoring switched on. If I go over to the mixer, this makes a lot more sense. So if we go to the mixer, you'll actually see here, the only way you're hearing this is through the orange loop. Have a look. So the first one is the MIDI channel, and the MIDI channel is sending the MIDI signal from the keyboard to these three AUV3 plugins, but we actually have Ravenscroft and D1 muted. So SDX is playing the sounds that we've told it to, and it's only going into the orange loop. Now, the orange loop's destination is 1 and 2 out, which is the stereo out. If I change this over to monitoring and say monitor in the speakers of 1 and 2, but don't monitor into the loop, you can now see the orange loop is not playing. This is vitally important for you to understand because it's showing you the signal path and the chain of where that AUV3 plugin is going. The MIDI's taken care of. We've set up our kit, and the final thing is whether you want to see the AUV3 plugin at the bottom of the performance bar. So in settings, you can see there's a symbol of an eye on the top right-hand corner. If I click this, it puts a cross through it, which means that if I go back to performance, I cannot see SDSX. Whereas if I go back and say yes, you can see it's added it at the bottom. I prefer this personally because it means I can turn them on and off as I see fit. And also when they're idle, it takes up less processing power than when they're active. As you can see here, I've got 3 active at the moment. It's taking up 14% of my M1 iPad Pro. If I turn them off, you can see it's gone down to 0. If I just have digital D1 on, it's taking about 7%. The last part of this is all about control. With this MIDI keyboard, I've actually got sliders, buttons, and knobs that I can program Loopy Pro App to control different things. So I don't know what the MIDI control number is for the first slider here. I've got 8 sliders. So let's go into MIDI Learn. Let's tap on the first one, and I want to control the volume of this clip. We're not going to do play stop, as you can see at the top here. We're going to go back to actions, and we're going to have a look at adjust parameter. Adjust parameter is different than pressing a button. It's a continuous MIDI control. For example, if I move a slider from here to here and let go, it will stay at that position until I move it again. So you can see here we've got volume, but we can also do things like balance, pitch, and speed. And we're just adjusting this one clip, and you can see it's listening for MIDI. So I'm going to control this first slider. There it is, CC67. We've got the minimum value as infinity dB, and we've got the maximum as 0 dB. And then we've also got the controller start as 0 and the controller end is 100%. So let's say, for example, I didn't want the maximum value to be 0 dB. I wanted it to be just lower that. I can actually bring that down. Now when we get out of there, we've got this loop. Let's play the loop. And then with the slider, I can actually control the volume. So if I push it all the way down to the bottom, it's an infinity dB, and go all the way to the top, it's 0 dB, just as we programmed. Now if I was to go to the mixer and have a look at this and press play again, it hasn't changed anything. It's not changing on the mixer, it's the volume of the clip. And the way I can check that is by swiping up on the specific clip. We're not programming a color right now, we're programming an individual clip. So now if I move the slider, I can see it there. The great thing about that is I've programmed it to be 0 dB at the top, so it's never going to go over that. As you can see, if I move it quite crazily around here, it's instant. Now that's obviously controlling the volume. You could have it controlling the pitch or the speed. It depends on what you want. The next one I've got a button underneath that fader, and I want to mute this specific clip. So again, we're going to go over to MIDI Learn. Click the first clip. We're not in play stop. We're going to go out of play stop, and we're going to go to mute. It's now listening for MIDI. So let's press the button, And as you can see there, it's got hold CC22. So as you can see there, it said hold, and I don't want it to be hold. So if that's the case, I can actually tap where it says hold CC22, and I can change it. So I actually want it to be on stroke off. So if you do press a button and it's not quite giving you the right command, maybe you held it down too long, maybe you double tapped it instead of single tapped it, you can go in and change it. So now if we go out of there and we go close, let's play the session. I can control the volume again. I can press this button. It's muted. Press it again. It's unmuted. Now all the time I've been making these commands, these CC numbers, it's all done under this one project. As you can see here, it says current project, and we can actually do a new profile, which means you could save that profile and bring it into another project if you wanted to. What I prefer to do is keep everything under the project as a template, and we can go to the top here and we can click save and it's given it a name, no problem at all. Now, as you've been making things with MIDI Learn and you've made a load of different changes, you need to see what's happening with MIDI. What we can do is we can go back into MIDI control. If you go back into MIDI control, you can see the connections and that's fine, but we can see the current project settings. Let's go into current project. These are all the different things we've done. I've only just done 2 things at the moment. So we've got CC67 for adjust the volume and CC22. Again, we can add a new binding here. If you don't want to sit there and look through the manual of the controller, like for example the keyboard controller, and you just want to go, that fader, I want it to do one thing, you can do it by MIDI Learn, but then you can see the entire list here. There's so much you can do with MIDI, and there's so much expansive stuff that you can do with MIDI, right through to controlling other things. For example, I could actually tell this keyboard to control the drums only on the pads that are over here, whilst the piano is actually on here, and the faders are doing something to do with the session. And that's all on one keyboard. If you've got multiple things like keyboards, pedals, controllers, and even some effect pedals now have MIDI for MIDI in and MIDI out, MIDI can get really complex really quickly. My number one rule, I would say, is that for each device that you're using, have a different MIDI channel. So if you've got a controller on channel 1, it simply can't interrupt the keyboard if that keyboard's on channel 2. Where most people fall down with MIDI is because everything is on one channel. So if you press a button, 6 things all happen at once, which they're not meant to, and you wonder why. However, you can send more than one MIDI command per press, which is fantastic because maybe you're going from a verse into a chorus and you press one button, the volume goes down a little bit or the volume goes up a little bit. You turn a keyboard on, you turn on an effect like a harmony at the same time, all by doing one button press. MIDI can be really powerful when you know how to program it up and how to control it. Now in the next video, we'll be having a look at one thing, but 2 elements. We're looking at recording. The first part is the sequencer and the other part is recording your entire session.